Hey, this is Mr. Mitchell with a video about insects and fish. Let's talk a little bit about insects first. You may remember that insects are arthropods. They have 3 body sections, 6 legs, a pair of antennae, and many times 1 or 2 pair of wings. One interesting thing about insects are their eyes. They have what's called a compound eye, and as you look at these close-up of their eyes, they look completely different than human eyes or even other animal eyes. The compound eye means that they have thousands of lenses. Many lenses in an insect eye. Now, what that does, it's still a very simple eye. It does not distinguish color very well. It's usually just lightness or darkness. But the advantage of having the compound eye is that it's good at distinguishing movement. With all these lenses, it's just very hard to have any movement around the insect without the insect perceiving it. So that's kind of the advantage of these compound eyes. I do want to mention the thorax. You see the parts of an insect. Everybody knows what the head and abdomen are. But the thorax is where the wings and legs are attached. And you can see the thorax here. It's where all the legs are attached here. You don't have legs attached to the abdomen. And if you had wings on this, looks like a grasshopper type thing, if it did have wings, it would be attached at the thorax. And you can see here, legs going everywhere, but they all stem from this thorax. So that's a little bit about what a thorax is. Insects are the only invertebrates that can fly. Like I said, often they'll have wings, so that means some insects will indeed be able to fly. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, insects have a face, but they don't have nostrils. They don't have a nose like we have. So, the question is, how does an insect breathe? Please pardon my errant marker there. But how does an insect breathe? Well, you may have noticed the words here that say breathing holes. Yes, throughout sections of the insect's body, there are actually little holes, predominantly on the abdomen, on the inside of the abdomen, where oxygen travels directly from these holes to cells in the insect. You can see here on kind of on the inside of this grasshopper, you can see all these little air holes right here. And whenever the oxygen, the air goes into these holes, it fills up in here and is disseminated to all the cells. Much different than our respiration is. No lungs whatsoever here in an insect. Insects begin as eggs. And in their lifetime, they'll undergo either a complete or gradual metamorphosis. I have a diagram for a complete metamorphosis over here, diagram for a gradual metamorphosis here. Complete metamorphosis is kind of like that of a butterfly. Well, it's exactly like that of a butterfly. You have 4 stages to a complete metamorphosis. You have eggs, you have larva, you have pupa, and you have adulthood. And in this case, you can see it's a ladybug. In the larva stage, well, it's like the caterpillar to the moth or to the butterfly. The caterpillar is not in its final adulthood stage. It's living and breathing, even though it's through its belly it's breathing. But it's living and breathing, but at some point it will go through the pupa stage. Now, the pupa stage is when it's enclosed in a protective covering. And you can see a ladybug does that. It's enclosed in a protective covering like the cocoon for the butterfly, and then after it breaks from that protective covering, it is an adult. Now, all insects do not do that. Many of them go through a gradual metamorphosis, and sure enough, I have a grasshopper again. This is like the third time I've had a grasshopper. But still, a grasshopper is one of many insects that do not really have a larva stage. They just don't have a larva stage. And what happens is it goes from egg to something coming from the egg, and it's called a nymph. Now notice this nymph grasshopper looks pretty much like a small adult. And for all the insects, that's how it will look. If it goes through gradual metamorphosis, it comes out of the egg looking like a small adult. But what will end up happening is, if it were to be an insect that had wings, it would come out without wings. And in this case, it doesn't have wings. Well, I guess some grasshoppers do. But regardless, the nymph is going to molt several times. It's going to have its kind of skin shed several times, and then after, in this case, it looks like 4 to 7 weeks, if you can read that, for a grasshopper, then it becomes an adult. So it does not ever go back into a protective casing like the pupa would. So besides grasshoppers, termites, and cockroaches, and many insects do this gradual metamorphosis. Well, why don't we talk about fish? Fish. Fish are vertebrates. They obtain oxygen through gills. Most of them are ectotherms, and most of them have scales. And you'll see the kinds that don't have scales here in just a moment. You can probably think of a kind or two. But nearly 1/2 of all vertebrate species are indeed fish. There are a lot of species of fish. As a fish swims, it will periodically open its mouth. Now you can see this fish down here has opened its mouth. I don't know if this is photoshopped with that goofy eye looking back at a goofy-eyed swimmer or not. But anyway, the fish is swimming with its open mouth. Now this is going to be how the fish breathes. The water is going to come through the mouth, and as it comes through the mouth, it is not digested. It will end up going out the gills, and you can see a better picture of the gills here. Water goes through the mouth, and water is going to go out the gills and not be ingested. But what's going to happen is it's really just a kind of a miraculous thing that happens here. I'm going to get back to my notes here. These gills have many blood vessels in them, so the oxygen from the water moves into the bloodstream through the gills. And waiting at the gills is carbon dioxide, which is going to be passed out to the water that goes out. And it just goes so quickly. Water in, exchange, water out. So the water will then flow back out of the water past the gills into the body of water, whatever happens to be. And it's just kind of amazing. And from there, the blood takes that oxygen to all parts of the fish. And there actually is a 2-chambered heart that the fish has. And it will end up pumping the, I guess I should go into blue. It will end up pumping the bad blood, which, well, I say bad blood, it's blood that has used up its oxygen and now has carbon dioxide, back to the gills for exporting out into the water. So it's really a fascinating way in which that actually happens here. Now most fish have external fertilization, and you know, I think I moved too far. Let me go back. Yeah, I did. Most fish have external fertilization. They're not like us where the baby ends up staying inside the mother. That's not the case for most fish. The male hovers close to the female and spreads a cloud of sperm cells over the eggs that she releases. And here's a picture of some fish eggs. Now, not all of them are circular or spherical. The young then develops outside the female body. Now there is an exception or two. Sharks and guppies, they're an exception. You actually have sharks that give birth because the baby shark spends its gestation period inside the shark. And here I included this picture. I don't think you can tell from here, but right underneath this fish is a bunch of eggs. A bunch of eggs that are sitting on the log here. So it is a very common thing for fish to protect eggs, and in fact it's many times the male fish which will wander around and protect eggs because other fish will eat fish eggs. Okay, three categories of fish. Now, the fish we most often think about are bony fish, and that is, according to your book, 95% of all fish species. But before we elaborate any on bony fish, let's go look at the exceptions. We have a couple of species of fish which are called jawless fish, and here's one of them. It is a lamprey, and you can imagine that it does not have a jaw like all the other fish here have, but it also does not have bones. These have no scales, no jaws, and no bones. No scales, no jaws, no bones. The cartilaginous fish, like a shark or some kind of ray, it has jaws. Oh, it definitely has jaws. And it has scales. Now, you wouldn't think that sharks have scales, but scales are long and pointy, and they give skin a rough texture to rays and to sharks. And these are usually carnivores. But they do not have bones, but they have scales, and they have jaws. But the things that have all three, scales, jaws, and bones, are the bony fish. So you can see like Nemo. Nemo is a bony fish. Congratulations, Nemo. Well, anyway, bony fish have a characteristic called a swim bladder. The swim bladder is located, as you can see, kind of above the intestine and below, or I guess maybe even to the side of the backbone. The swim bladder is a gas-filled sac that helps the fish stay stable at different depths. So the fish can go to 1 foot of water, or it can dive down to 80 feet of water. But if it's in 80 feet of water, it has to have this gas sac, this swim bladder, filled. Because what it will do, because of all the pressure that's in 80 feet of water, it's hard to keep its balance in 80 feet of water. It's hard to keep fin side up, I guess you might say. So what this swim bladder does is kind of like if you're walking on a creaky set of stairs, it is kind of like the guide handrails. It kind of keeps its balance. Now, one thing you may notice here, it's not in our book, is this fisherman has this needle-like thing. This needle-like thing is what fishermen sometimes use to puncture the swim bladder. No, it's not hurting the fish. Here's what happens. Say this fisherman catches a fish in 50 feet of water. The fish in 50 feet of water is going to have a swim bladder that is filled. But whenever it gets to the surface, in this case against its will, it has been caught, the swim bladder is still full. So it's going to be kind of painful to a fish which is up here near the surface to have a full swim bladder. It's not supposed to have a full swim bladder near the top. It's supposed to have a full swim bladder near the bottom. So what fishermen will often do who catch fish in the depths is they will carry this needle-like thing around, and they are actually puncture the swim bladder, which heals itself, and it relieves that pressure from the fish. Hey, I hope you've learned a little bit about insects and fish.